My name is Zunaira Rashid, and I'm a fine arts graduate from the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. My work is all about exploring print media, tearing and ripping it apart, then piecing it back together to create something new. It's a hands on process that feels raw and unpredictable, but it's also where I find the most meaning. Growing up, my connection to paper began in an unexpected way. It was actually through my mother's magazines, especially Khawateen Digest. These weren't just magazines in my household, though, they were a cultural staple and a window into the imagined lives of women navigating their roles in Pakistani society. My mother would spend hours engrossed in stories of women and their lives after marriage, tales of family, love, and strength. The women in my family, such as my aunts, cousins, including my mother, would often gather to discuss the narratives they had read. It was clear to me that this wasn't just entertainment for them, it was a shared experience, a way for them to bond and reflect on their own realities through the lens of these stories. Years later, as I began exploring my artistic practice, I realized how much those childhood moments had shaped me. I discovered a love for working with found materials, pieces that came with their own histories, their own stories. In a way, breaking those materials down became an act of rebuilding narratives on my own terms. Of course, it wasn't just the pages of Khawateen Digest that became a part of my artistic exploration. I began collecting all kinds of print media, posters, prints, magazines, newspapers, anything that already carried some form of imagery or text. Okay, so this is where um, my magazine exploration began because in this corner was where I would find many of these magazines with women in them, and just like fashion magazines with clothes, but also with men in them. So there was lots of just images of advertisements of these paintings. So these are all the different Khawateen Digest magazines. Size of the magazine is something that was really interesting to me. So I started branching out not just through Khawateen Digest but other magazines too. Multiple types. So just these. And then here is where what I really liked was that most of these had these like yellow pages. And then when you compare them to pages like these, they're gray. So then I wanted these two types of magazines where you find the yellow and the gray comparison. So then that's how I started picking out my magazines कि कौन सी जिसके ऊपर gray है किसके ऊपर yellow है. So this is where I found a lot of different types of magazines, not just the local ones. These are things that you don't really get here. These are very imported, I think. These are more books. Within this bookstore. यहाँ पे ये पुरानी होने वाले on the flip side that this would be the wallpaper, and then this is what you would see behind it. And you can even catch it because ये यहाँ पे black है, but then if you see on the side you can see that there's actually yellow paper within the black papers.
I stack the covers aside in a separate bundle. These aside in a separate bundle. So these are all like yellow pages. So the way that I start is that this is, for example, this is the gray page notebook and this is the yellow page one. I'll take out the pins. It's really difficult for the entire paper to come out. So now that the pins are upwards, I take a bunch of this, then I start tearing. Together. So then I go through the bundle again and I find like, you know, those middle pages. And then I start tearing those also. With this magazine especially has been that I want to get rid of the content of the paper itself. And so I try to, before starting every piece, I will take at least one piece of paper randomly and then I'll just kind of tinker with it. I'll fold it in different ways to see how can I just get rid of the text or make it very confusing to read, so there's no beginning, there's no end. And so a part of that process was also looking at the whiteness of the paper, because these white parts are things that people don't really look at because this is what the concentrated part is. So I made a piece where I wanted to kind of just work with these white lines, whether it was the yellow paper or the gray paper. So then I began just, simply stacking my paper like this, where like I wanted to keep one gray paper, one yellow paper, then another gray paper. The piece, you can easily peel it off. If there's glue underneath your piece, then you'll just stick to the glass. Then I take another piece. And so the way I layered this is that I'll put this on top and I'll keep this in my hand. Then I'll put some gel and then slowly put this down so that all the air bubbles can get out. So this is how the process gets repeated to the point where you can see the tones of grey and the yellow together. The way that I play around with this, there's really no telling when to stop. And right now it's looking very not structurally sound, but once it dries, this becomes very rock solid. So this is how just this paper, if you layer it enough, becomes relief-like, and eventually becomes like a sculptural thing. Mainly making sure that this is coming out. And this is how. So if you hold it like this, actually stuck pretty well. It's become one. Now the only thing that's left is to put it on a board, not a glass, but a board, so that it dries. And then once it dries, you can peel it off.